Thanks so much for the opportunity to be with you today and to speak about how we've been using virtual reality, which many people think of principally as a gaming platform, as in our case, a therapeutic treatment paradigm for patients in the hospital, patients in the clinic. And I'll share with you for the next 20 minutes some of the lessons learned in using virtual reality as a therapeutic paradigm for our patients. So to get started, I want to share this picture here, which is a picture of me with one of our patients at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. We've now treated well over 3,000 patients using virtual reality. And this is one of our patients. She's allowed us to show her image. And at this particular moment, she's contemplating whether or not to use that virtual reality headset to help manage her pain as an adjunct to the medical therapy that she's been using in the hospital. And in a little bit, I'll show you what happens with her and what happens with other people who have been using virtual reality at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. So I want to start by showing you the first time that I used virtual reality. It's been about 5 years now, but before that, I hadn't even heard of virtual reality. You know, I'm a Western trained medical doctor. I've certainly had not been thinking about using something like VR to help treat pain or to treat anxiety or depression. I hadn't even heard of virtual reality until a team came into my office and they put me in this virtual reality headset. And this is the first thing that I saw. I was going up the side of a 50-story building on this window washer rig. And this is the first person view of my actual experience. And as I was looking around, I was noticing these details like the glint of sunlight shining off of these metallic handrails right in front of me, or the sunlit rotary way down below, and the trucks and the cars going around. And I was just noticing these details. But at least I was safe, because I'm a little bit afraid of heights. But just as I'm kind of getting comfortable up there, programmers decided to play a trick on me, and off goes the protective railing. And I immediately fly back to the wall behind me, which it turns out was a whiteboard, because I was sitting in a conference room. And they said, listen, go ahead and jump off the building. I said, no chance, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to jump off the building. And they said, well, you know that your feet are on carpet. And I always say the same thing when I tell the story. I say, well, my feet knew they were on carpet, but my brain didn't know. My brain wasn't taking any chances. They said, go ahead and jump off. And the only way I was able to even contemplate it is I had a cheat. I could see a little light coming through the head-mounted display, and I can make out the carpet enough to break this illusion for me to get up the energy to jump off this building and fall to my virtual death. And that's the first time that I used virtual reality. And I thought, man, if it could be used for evil, there's got to be a way that we can use this technology for good. And that's what I've been working on for the past 5 years, is how can we use the astonishing presence, psychological presence that VR allows, that when it sort of hijacks the brain, but use that for good. Now, what I just shared with you was the first time that I died in virtual reality. Now I want to share with you the second time that I died in virtual reality and what I learned from that second time and how that insight has affected all of the research that I've done since then. And this is the University of Barcelona, and I flew out to Barcelona to meet with Mel Slater, who some of you may know is a world-renowned researcher at the University of Barcelona in virtual reality. And I went to his lab, and when I got to his lab, he showed me around, and one of the rooms in his lab was this rather nondescript sort of black cave-like room. And I was brought into this area, and they asked me to sit down on that chair and to put on this bodysuit and to kick my legs out onto the coffee table in front of me. And that's Ramon Olivas, who is a postdoc who at the time was working with Mel Slater. And he put this headset on me, and all of a sudden, that nondescript room turned into this rather beautiful living space with wood paneling and a chandelier. And I'm looking around, and I'm noticing my legs there on the table in front of me. And what they did next is they asked me to start moving my legs, and they traced these blue lines on the table, and they asked me to move my heel along those lines. And in a perfect one-to-one synchrony, as I moved my feet, I could see my feet move. And I started to realize, wow, whose legs are those? If they're not my legs, I don't know whose they are, because they're moving like my legs. They're in the same place as my legs. And you know, those have got to be my legs. I knew somewhere in that room there was a computer running thousands of lines of code, zeros and ones, that were playing a trick on my brain that was causing me to embody this digital avatar. Now, what he did next is he dropped these balls from the ceiling, and as each ball hit my physical body, I felt this vibration because he had embedded vibration engines inside the suit. So I was able to feel them and even juggle them and kick them back and forth. So now I had what Mel Slater calls full virtual embodiment. I had become this sort of digital doppelganger of myself. Now, what happened next is hard to describe in words, and harder even to describe physically and visually. I'm just going to show it to you in 2 dimensions, but you have to just somehow imagine what I was feeling as I went through this. What happened next is all of a sudden, my view of the world detached itself from that body that I had just inhabited. And I started to slowly float up to the ceiling. Those balls followed me and they continued to hit me, reminding me that I did have this physical body, but I looked down and I saw that body down there motionless. I want to replay it again because as I pulled back, I felt almost like sinews were stretching and snapping as I was pulled out of my body. And I had a complete out-of-body experience. And I had this astonishing moment when I realized that I had passed away. I had died. That body was not moving anymore. Now, this out-of-body experience caused me to think a little bit differently about death, and it has ever since. Having virtually died and sort of come back to life, I can now say I fear death just a little bit less than I did before. I'm still afraid of dying, but having kind of practiced dying, I now have a different view of what it's like to die. Now, it turns out others have gone through this experience, and this is a study that was published by Mel Slater's lab. A virtual out-of-body experience reduces fear of death. And what he did in this study is he randomized people to either go through this experience or a similar but different experience, a control experience. And the people that went through this out-of-body experience had less fear of death, not just immediately after, but a week after. And they had no idea this study had anything to do about fear of death. They didn't know what it was about. They just knew they were going to put on a VR headset. And he was able to demonstrate that this VR experience could change perception of not only the world, but of oneself and oneself's reality in that world. So this is the first big insight that I'll come back to during this talk, is that VR is a tool that modifies perception. And what that means is if we can use it to recalibrate unhealthy perceptions, then maybe we can use it to improve the quality of life of people and of patients in particular. Now, we've been using virtual reality at Cedars-Sinai now for several years, having used it now in over 3,000 patients. And this is an example of one of the virtual environments that we use at Cedars-Sinai. If you listen, you can hear, hopefully, coming through some music. This is music playing in the background. And as we play this music, patients who just moments before had been sitting in a room, sort of recovering from surgery or pain, and now they're floating with dolphins. And people tend to have this rapid change in their perception, not only of their physical space, but of their own body. And I can remember an example a couple years ago of a woman who had severe recurrent abdominal pain. And we didn't know what was causing it. She had a normal CT scan, she had normal lab studies, and upper endoscopy and colonoscopy, and everything was normal. And I was asked to see if we could figure out what was going on. And we put this headset on her, and she was quiet for several minutes looking at this dolphin scene. And then after about 4 or 5 minutes, she said, "You know what? I think I know what's causing this pain." And I said, "Really, what's causing the pain?" She said, "It's my brother." Now, this was a surprise to me. I didn't think she was going to say that. I said, "Really, what about your brother?" And she said, "He died young of stomach cancer, and I'm going to die like you." I said, "I know, but we've talked about how you don't have stomach cancer. We've looked in your stomach and it's not there." And she said, I know. Everyone keeps telling me that, but these dolphins are telling me that I have to move on with my life. I have to accept that I'm not going to die that way." And somehow, in a matter of minutes, she went from being in distress in a hospital bed to having this incredible epiphany about herself that the virtual reality unlocked. And if I had more time, I'd talk about the neuroscience behind that. But I do want to touch base a little bit on what's happening in the brain, particularly as it pertains to pain, because she also discovered that her pain had reduced quite a bit during this experience. So it turns out that there's been a number of studies looking at what virtual reality does to the brain. And this is one of the most famous studies from Hunter Hoffman at the University of Washington. And what he did here is he took research subjects and he exposed them to a painful stimulus. It was sort of a hot probe on the foot, not injurious, but painful nonetheless. And what he did is he first had them not in virtual reality, like on the left, and then in virtual reality. And you can see if you look that there is a reduction in the amount of signaling in the brain. But if you look more carefully, it's more than just that. On the left, you see that there's signaling in the sensory cortex of the brain, where we physically experience the pain, but also in the limbic system, in the insular cortex, where there is the emotional experience of pain. And virtual reality tamped down both the physical pain processing and the emotional pain processing. And this is critical because something like an opioid may reduce the physical experience of pain, but it might not reduce the emotional experience of pain. Now, it was the Buddha who, many years ago, described pain as having two arrows. He said the first arrow is when the archer pulls back the bow and flings the arrow and it strikes our body and it hurts, it physically hurts. But the second arrow, he said, is the self-induced injury. That's where we look at the first arrow and we say, oh my God, I'm going to die. What does this mean about my life? It's the existential anxiety around the pain. So that's the physical and the emotional components of pain. Now, there's been several studies looking at the impact of virtual reality on both physical and emotional pain. And these are two illustrative examples. On the left, a study from the University of Washington using virtual reality during bandage changes for people with severe burns, a very severe painful experience. And on the right, women at the University of Michigan undergoing childbirth. And in both cases, if you look, there's a reduction not only in the worst pain, but also in the time spent thinking about pain and the unpleasantness of the pain. Same thing here, time spent thinking about pain, worse pain, and unpleasantness of the pain. So that's both the physical experience of pain and the emotional and cognitive experiences of pain. Now, we've recently published another study reproducing the childbirth data. This is a study led by Melissa Wong and Kim Gregory at Cedars-Sinai, where we have demonstrated that compared to a control group, there is also a net reduction in pain in those subjects who underwent virtual reality-based childbirth versus a control condition. So we've been doing this now at Cedars-Sinai in a number of different settings. And normally if you're in a hospital like ours, we have a lovely hospital. It's the largest hospital in the Western United States. It's a modern hospital, private rooms, but really this is not where people want to be. Our patients in these rooms are suffering physically, emotionally, socially, especially now during the COVID pandemic when you can't even have somebody visit you in the hospital. And what happens all day long is you stare up at this television set, up at the ceiling, and then somebody like me shows up, not necessarily smiling, coming in all different times of day, asking lots of questions, and we disappear. Then we come back, then we disappear again. And this goes on and on. So we thought maybe we can do better than this. What if we can allow people to sort of escape the four walls of the hospital? What if we can give them an opportunity to escape into fantastical destinations, to go into, for example, Hawaii, or to go to Iceland, or to go underwater in this case. And you can see this patient, she's reaching out, grabbing the blue whale as it passes across her body in her room to escape those four walls. And we've been interviewing and talking with our patients and learning what works and what doesn't work. And it turns out, not surprisingly, that different patients have different preferences for this technology. Some people maybe want to go on an escape to a safari, or others want to go to an ice cave or a waterfall or go wherever. Other people may want to use it really for biofeedback training, for mindful meditation. We use biofeedback, we're now using EEG and heart rate variability and breathing rate to drive the metaphorical narratives. So there's all sorts of opportunities. Now I want to share with you two of our patients here using virtual reality for the first time, so you can see for yourself what it's like. So we'll see if it helps with the pain or not. You'll tell us.
Yes.
And we'll go from there. Okay, any questions about that?
Pull that down over your eyes now.
Should load up.
Whoa.
What do you see?
Horses?
Yep, okay. And over the bridge, is that working?
Yes.
What's happening now?
The helicopter, waterfalls.
Have you ever been to Iceland?
No.
With the music and everything, it's real peaceful. Oh, it's people. Hey. That's cool.
So what'd you think?
It's pretty relaxing.
Uh-huh.
Especially with the music and everything, and then the different scenery. Like, it was just one part where it was like a waterfall. You're sitting in a cave,
Right.
and it's a waterfall right next to you. Almost made me forget I was here. Like, cause you're there.
Right.
It's like you're really there. You're hearing the waterfall, and everything is like you look around, and it's the whole scenery.
Right.
It's like you're immersed in it.
How did it make you feel?
Relaxed. Very relaxed. I wasn't thinking about the pain.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't.
Really?
I was just thinking about being there
Uh-huh.
and having a good time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We'll let Dr. Herman know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Good, okay.
Yes, but I really did like it. I enjoyed it really much.
Excellent.
Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
picking me.
So it's one thing for me to give a talk like this or to show you research studies, but it's quite another to hear directly from our patients. And I had been hearing stories like this and wanting to share them, but we decided we really needed to do a research study to see if this was reproducible. And we've conducted now and published a number of studies. This is one of our most recent and largest studies, where what we did in this study is we took 140 patients in the hospital with pain. They had to have pain of 3 or greater on a scale from 0 to 10. And it was pain from all sorts of different kinds of conditions. And they got randomized either to virtual reality, where they were given access to a library of different experiences, some games, some distractions, some mindful meditation, or they got to watch this health and wellness relaxation channel on the television set in their room. And that's how they were randomized. And then we monitored their pain over the course of the hospitalization. And what you can see here is when we looked at all patients, there was a greater reduction in the pain in the VR group than in the television group over the course of the hospitalization. This was statistically significant. But this was an even larger effect in people with the most severe pain. Scores of 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 had the largest reductions in pain. So this is consistent with other studies, again, showing that there seems to be a benefit for pain with virtual reality in the hospital. We've been using increasingly sophisticated and beautiful visualizations. These are some screenshots from our partners at Applied VR, the company in Los Angeles. They've been going through an FDA regulatory pathway for their software, and we've been using a lot of their software in the hospital, also working with many other companies, including Trip VR, XR Health, and there are so many others now developing. So for the next hour, I could give you a lecture about all of these other use cases of virtual reality, but I'm out of time, other than to say it's being used for dementia, being used for schizophrenia, for eating disorders, high blood pressure. We did a study, and it goes on. And if you're interested in this, we have a website for our VR program at Cedars-Sinai. It's called Virtual Medicine. Go to virtualmedicine.org or virtualmedicine.health. And on there, you can see we have a webinar series. This is a free webinar series. We had one just last week. We're going to be posting that recording shortly if it's not already up. We have videos of our patients using VR and of over 40 or 50 different international experts giving lectures at our live courses. Typically, we have a live course in March. I also have written a book. This book will be a wide release book published by Basic Books out of New York, coming out on October 6th. And I encourage you to take a look if you're interested in this topic. It's available now for pre-sale. This is a book that really asks big questions. What does VR teach us about our consciousness? What does it teach us about the way the mind and the body are connected and how we can really use this as a legitimate science-based tool to manage people's care in healthcare, not just in some kind of newfangled new age way, but in an actual evidence-based Western medicine type of way. And that's what VRX is all about. So with that, since I'm here in Los Angeles and Hollywood, I'm going to end with a scroll of all the different people and patients and participants of the research that I've been showing you today. And I want to thank all of them. And if you're interested, you can follow me on social media, on Twitter. We also have a Twitter handle for our VR program at Cedars-Sinai. And I want to thank the meeting organizers for inviting me to be with you today. Appreciate it very much. And I look forward to answering questions. Thanks.